and I'm not trying to steal too much of your thunder, but Fred Ligon is a very, very good friend of mine. I'm also honored to call him as my pastor in my church. But the reason why Fred's here today is because, and I think it's safe to say, not by himself, but Fred had put together, and I won't even call it a charity, just what I feel is just an awesome, awesome mission. Tammy Harden, who is Fred's boss, is also here to kind of co-present, although she said he's going to do all the talking. But I wanted to give Fred enough time to get his spiel out. So, Fred, if you could.
Well, it's good to be here with you again. I don't know if you remember, I had the honor of sharing a little bit about 3Restoration story with you several months ago. I'm like a dog, I have no concept of time. It could have been 2 years ago, but many of you look familiar to me. So I will briefly explain what 3Restoration is. I'll do so within the context of a story. Then I'll offer you some boring data and let you know kind of how this is all expanded to the degree that it has. I'm the president of the board and the founder of 3Restoration Incorporated, and this is kind of how it grows, and this is how it works. I met a man named Collins. His story's public, and he told me he wants to be the poster child of this, so this is a chance. And I met him in a homeless shelter. He looked like he'd only been homeless for a handful of months. He was in his mid-50s. And so I pulled him in my office, and I said, hey, you know, what's going on? Would you mind sharing your story? I can share some of mine. And this was after I'd gotten to know him just a little bit. Well, come to find out, he had been a very successful real estate agent. All of this has been verified. I looked, but he's been a very successful real estate agent. The market crashed several years ago. He decided that he would go into restaurant management, and Williamsburg is a pretty good place to do that. He landed a really good job, managed a restaurant, did really well, but he had knee and back problems. So he began to take a lot of Tylenol, a lot of ibuprofen. Well, over the course of time, popping so much Tylenol and ibuprofen led to liver failure. He started feeling sick, did not know what it was, went to the doctor, come to find out that's exactly what he had. He was in stage 4 renal failure. Doc said he needed dialysis. Doc said he couldn't work. He started going to dialysis. He couldn't work. One day after several weeks, couple of months of going to dialysis, spending 4 to 6 hours there a day, he puts his key in his apartment building. Key doesn't work. He looks out across the way, notices a lot of stuff in the front, and it happens to be his. At that moment, he was homeless. He had nowhere to go. At this point, it was 1 month before the homeless shelter had begun here in Williamsburg, James City County. Knowing he had nowhere to go, he only had to sleep on the streets just a few nights before he could enter into other arrangements with apartments. He milked his savings. He did everything he had. He had no family to fall back on. Mother's sick. Father's deceased. Sister lived several states away. Started to move there. But really determined he wanted to get back on his feet. He goes to the doctor. Doctor says, you're healed. Out of nowhere. He's no longer in renal failure. He gets this clean bill of health, but he can't go to work for another 60 days. And that's when I meet him, is in the in-between. By now, he's pretty hopeless. He's homeless. He's pretty distraught. As a result of being homeless for just a handful of months, he began to pick up what we call adverse coping behaviors. He started making impulsive decisions. When you are no longer living in a place of responsibility, because you don't have a job to go to, a floor to sweep, a house to clean, bills to pay, and you're on the street, you're not thinking about tomorrow, you're just thinking about how you're going to get through tonight. We call that a posture of survivability. That gives birth to lots of impulsive decisions and lots of impulsive behaviors. He wasn't thinking about tomorrow, he was thinking about today. His mind was cycling down. So there's a cognitive reality to homelessness. There's an emotional reality to homelessness. He was traumatized by all he had gone through. There's obviously a physical reality of homelessness. He had no place to go. But there was a social reality of homelessness because now he found himself thrust in relationships that were foreign and new to him. Relationships that were also struggling in their own ways, cognitively, emotionally, because there was a community of people living through homelessness. But he also felt abandoned and alone because no one that he used to know really wanted much to do with him anymore. His sister even struggled, though they have reconciled and have a wonderful relationship. We began walking with him. And what 3Restoration process does is it gives them a person who decides that they're going to be a chief friend in their life if they'll let them. And that chief friend will help reorient their lives cognitively and emotionally through a curriculum that I've written that's trauma-informed, evidence-based, and best practices. And through this curriculum, they begin to get tools that can help them make different decisions in their life. We make available other services within the community with other businesses that have partnered with us, whether it's even counseling or financial management or those kind of things. We begin to walk with this person. And not only that, we have a network of people that are located in local churches who have no other agenda other than to just simply be a friend with a person who desperately needs a friend. We call them all-in friends. They're just regular folks who say, I'll take them to point A to point B, grab a cup of coffee with them, help him wash his, help him learn how to wash clothes again, help him get his house situated. Whatever a friend needs, all-in friends, regular folks will just be present. The person that's kind of the chief relationship is what we call a servant leader coordinator. In this case, it was me, where we sit down once a week, we go through the curriculum, we learn each other's stories, and we genuinely become good friends. Well, I'm glad to say that Collins now has great employment. He's healthy. He's housed. Has a great friend. Has a great relationship with his roommate. And we've only had to help him with rent one time in a year. He just needed to get out of the spiral that he was falling into and help someone give him a little bit of hope. And that's really what 3 Restoration does. We equip and encourage and empower, those are the 3 E's, local faith communities to be able to do the same thing, equip, encourage, and empower what we call our friends in need to move out of homelessness to holistic sufficiency by addressing the cognitive, emotional, physical, spiritual, and social realities of poverty and homelessness. It's not what we think it is. People don't end up on the street because they drunk themselves out and drug themselves out on the street. Drinking and drugs, if it is a part of somebody's narrative, it's usually a behavioral response to the condition they find themselves in. Or they're just dealing with the trauma and have no other way to cope. Add on that the marginalization and everything else, the schools of denial that we all seem to visit, and you have these problems. And it continues to perpetuate. And what they need is a community of people who say, we'll be present with you in it. We're not going to be better than you. We're going to join you in the midst of it. And local communities of faith are sometimes really well postured for this. So since this all began in my church 5 years ago, where I pastor, I've been doing this work for 12 years. About almost 3 years ago, we launched out a nonprofit, 501c3, 3Restoration Incorporated, where Tammy Harden serves as executive director. A man named John Sprinkle is our director of programs and care management services. Since only our 3-year birth, by the grace of God, we have been awarded a $100,000 grant from the Commonwealth of Virginia because they saw the work we were able to do. We're grassroots oriented. We take an organic, bottom-up, systemic approach to solving homelessness and poverty versus a top-down sort of legislative approach. We equip other faith communities to do the work. We don't do the work for churches or faith communities. We equip them and train them and resource them to do that work. Since then, we have 7 partnering churches, Newtown United Methodist being one of them, Williamsburg Community Chapel, Williamsburg Christian Church, King of Glory Lutheran Church, Williamsburg United Methodist Church, and Common Ground Church in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which, by the way, we now are in Fredericksburg, Virginia, as well as neck deep with 7 churches here in Williamsburg, Virginia. And we just recently launched out in Dallas, Texas, where we trained a faith community there, and we're seeing the movement take out there. So what began as a little humble effort of one little church here in Williamsburg 5 years ago has now sprung into an effort, a coordinated grassroots effort of 7 faith communities in Williamsburg alone, a multi-million-dollar nonprofit services agency in Fredericksburg, Virginia, with another partnering church, whereas we're launching more churches there, and then, of course, in Dallas, Texas. And your support, your questions, some of you are very involved, like Bob's on our advisory board. Your support in this has been a part of what we have seen take place within 3 Restoration Incorporated, where lives are changing. So just to give you some of the boring data, because people want numbers, and though we live more by stories and different qualitative and quantitative metrics and measures, I'll offer you some of the numbers. This was published, and we are out of them, but we're going to get one for each one of you, just as a thank you for taking time. It has stories in here. It's actually more than just a marketing brochure. It has some stories in here for you to read. Tammy has a few, but we'll get them to Jason and make sure everybody has one. But as of November of last year, so these numbers have changed, we had stabilized 12 men and women and families through temporary housing with 6 pending permanent, we have walked with 18 active people in the 3 restoration process from homelessness to holistic sufficiency. Since then, we've trained over 50 men and women locally to serve as what we call servant leader coordinators. We have 15 active servant leader coordinators serving with the Friends in Need. We have currently launched a consulting division within our company because now we consult other nonprofits and other mentoring agencies such as Williamsburg Walk the Talk. Raise your hand if you've heard of them. Williamsburg Walk the Talk? Okay, well they've been around for a little while. They help people in prison who come out of prison through reentry. We train them. We have a consulting division as well, and then we have the housing division where we can now house men and women who have been on the street and move them into a place of sufficiency and then address all the other realities in their lives so that they're healed, they're transformed, and the systemic causes of homelessness are addressed so that hopefully relapse will not take place. And that just happened 3 years ago. So God has been very gracious to us. And it's a very beautiful, 2 years ago, see? I'm like a dog, no concept of time. That's only 2 years ago. You would think since I started this thing I would know the time frame. God has been very gracious to us and we've seen some beautiful change. Thank you for letting me share a little bit of this with you. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Feel free to ask the resident expert, Tammy Harden. But I really appreciate your time, appreciate your efforts to support works of making James City County and Williamsburg a better place to live for everybody. Because everybody, all of our neighbors matter. So thank you for being concerned about that.
Fred, I heard it said that the homeless in Williamsburg are different. Do you find that to be true? Or is...
You know, I have. Homelessness in Williamsburg, James City County is a vastly different culture than what I was used to in Athens, Georgia, Amarillo, Texas, and in Columbus, Georgia, which is where I've lived and worked for the last, now 14 years. I could give lots of my own socio-cultural, anthropological opinions as to why that's the case, but it is definitely a different culture. I will say that James City County and Williamsburg is one of the worst places I've ever been to in terms of finding yourselves homeless because we have very minimal resource here. Very, very minimal. The narrative that people are moving from other places to be homeless here is actually a false narrative because the resources here are just, they're terrible. You'll get them better in Hampton, Newport News, and Richmond. So maybe that's a part of it too. There's a cultural issue and frankly a little bit of a denial for those of us who live here that we even have the issue. But William and Mary's Education Department discovered that there were 454 homeless children in the James City County School District. Each child comes with at least one parent, maybe two. So you can tell the narrative is much bigger than we'd like to admit. But that's a great observation, brother.
What kind of roadblocks or pushbacks have y'all been getting over the last 5 years? Because this is, I know the story, but
Yeah.
this is this is a new approach to the problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times homelessness is addressed through behavioral modification approaches. And behavioral modification doesn't lend itself to addressing some of the other narratives and other socio-cultural factors that play into a person's homelessness. So we get pushback sometimes based on our approach. Once people sit down and learn the approach, it's a pretty easy sell. The biggest struggle we have is the false narrative that we don't have a problem. That we don't have a homelessness, poverty, or even a prostitution problem here. That it's not a real issue. But the fact is, I've smelled it. I've seen it. And many of us have. So a lot of times, it's helping people withdraw themselves from the school of denial and enter into a school of informed conversation. So the narrative and the story becomes the biggest challenge.
You never mentioned a temple, or did you talk about these churches? I'm Jewish.
Right.
And I was wondering why there's been no attempt to incorporate Temple Bethel, for example, here in Williamsburg,
Right.
into this program.
Right. Well, there actually has. Rabbi David is a good friend of mine. And we talk about what it looks like to continue to collaborate. It's an interfaith movement. And so, because there is absolutely zero requirement that the friend in need go to a church or be a part of a church or even have faith whatsoever. Matter of fact, we have a very firm stance against the notion of proselytization. And so it's an interfaith movement. It's clearly a Christian-based, faith-based entity and Christian faith based movement. But, Rabbi David is very interested in the curriculum and how it works because, frankly, it's just rooted in good social science, too. So, it has happened and happening. Maybe with your help it can happen even more. Tell the story for us. Actually, did you?
Yeah. Congratulations on the grant, by the way.
Thank you.
What are you going to do with the money?
Great question. We're going to house people with it. That money allowed us to hire a care manager to actually do some of the on-the-ground care with the people who are literally living on the streets, and then every other dollar of that, which is over half of that money, will go directly to funding the homelessness problem and putting them from the streets into a place to live so that they can get well. We have very strict guidelines to abide by this. So great question.
It's my understanding, though, that a lot of what's going on in this particular community that's different is that there are a lot of folks who are precariously housed. In other words, they're not necessarily living on the streets, but they're living in motels that you and I would want to be in for even a couple of hours, much less living there for weeks at a time. So that there's an issue of helping people move from that very precarious setting into a more mainstream kind of apartment setting. Is that what you're being able to do?
Yes, but it is both and.
Okay.
There are people living in the woods and under the stars.
Yes.
But it's a lot easier to talk about precariously housed folks. But by McKinney-Vento's definition of homelessness, people who are vulnerably housed or precariously housed, as the phrase is, are by definition homeless because their shelter is not contingent upon their own provision. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of those folks, yes, we do find them in hotels, motels, quite a bit. Mostly your families stay there.
Right.
Rarely do you do find individuals, but mostly families. But there's more people sleeping in the woods and sleeping under the stars and under bridges than a point-in-time count will show because of the cultural nature of what takes place here in Williamsburg and James City County.
And we do really leave it up to our faith community, whoever they want to work with.
Yeah, so they choose,
their
it's whoever comes their
relationship may be with someone, for example, right now, a lady and 4 children at the Pineapple who they're living on the son's SSI, and she's trying to work, but there's a lot of disability going on. So they want to work with her. She's precariously housed because she's paying her rent, even though, and then we also have people that want to work with people who are literally homeless, meaning they can't pay their own rent. Someone else is paying it.
And the fact of the matter is, when you are homeless, your eviction notice and your credit is shot, right? And you have an eviction, so sometimes the only housing you can get is at a Motel 6.
Right.
So, and then they get called precariously housed. But there's a lot of factors that's a moving target. So it's a both and. Great question.
3E is on the very steep part of the growth curve organizationally, and will take a while probably to mature. But at this point in your development, what would you say your greatest resource needs? Is time, people, dollars, all of the above?
It's funny. Obviously, a nonprofit guy would say all of the above, but our major issue is organizational capacity in terms of people resources. With us launching out in Fredericksburg, in terms of the curriculum and the process, we've seen fruit and success. Now it's having the organizational capacity, people-wise, to take that to the next level. So we're at a point right now where we're saying no, because we're not going to expend ourselves organizationally and then overpromise and underdeliver. So we're having to say no, which is why we launched a consulting division, which becomes an income stream for us to fund what we're trying to do. And as a nonprofit, you need some sort of income stream, because we do not ask churches to give us money. We would rather the faith communities to give that money to that person they're walking with to help that person get on their feet. So money's always a major issue because money is associated with people getting hired. So, but I would say organizational capacity is a people issue, and therefore we do need finances.
Can I add one piece to
Go ahead.
that? Our other piece too is landlords. We need housing units because affordable housing is an issue here. So just having landlords that would speak with us and work with us, because we do housing based in-home care management. So having those landlords that would be open to letting us work with them is also a great need.
That's a good point. Great question too. Thank you for asking that. Steep curve it is. Any other?
Fred, do you have any comment or thoughts about how the judicial system handles the issue of homelessness?
With a change of leadership that seems to occur over the last 5 years, with some new board of supervisors, with some of the new leadership, it's interesting. I think the tenor is changing. You know, it wasn't until 4 years ago that Williamsburg was allowed to have a temporary homeless shelter, right? So I think the tenor judicially is changing, but there still is an issue. We jail people very quickly, and when you jail someone who's in homelessness, the idea of getting a job becomes a very big challenge. And so I think jailing folks a little prematurely, not dealing with mental illness and intellectual disability, which a lot of people living through homelessness either live with or develop over the course of time. That's an issue, so we lack some legislative resource there. And then, of course, the general story of homelessness and allowing us to have better affordable housing. Average rent in James City County is $11.68. You're not going to pay that on a $9 an hour job. Just ain't happening.
All
Good
right.
question.
Well, I want to thank you both again. You want to do it?
I'll be happy to.
All right.
As you all know, the Jamboree produced a lot of resources, and while the check is in the mail, I'm going to congratulate you and say that we're sending $500 to your efforts.
Thank you.
And we hope to be able to continue to do that in the future. So
Thank you
thanks-
very much.
Thanks for being available to us.
Thank you for supporting us.
Absolutely.
Gotta get a picture.
Come on, guys, shake
Oh,
hands. Friends, like, you know, we're having a good time.
All right, so Tammy, I am
Thank you
going to
all
have,
very much.
don't, before